Hi everyone, my name is Randika and this is Jerome, and today we are here to talk about why we should care about multiculturalism in Sri Lanka. So, Jerome, why should we care about multiculturalism?
I have so much to say about this topic because I'm very passionate about Sri Lankan multiculturalism.
I know, that's exactly why I asked you.
Um, but the thing about multiculturalism in Sri Lanka is that I feel for a lot of our history that our multicultural history of Sri Lanka has been almost obscured, and I feel like not enough people in Sri Lanka are aware of how diverse and multicultural and multi-ethnic Sri Lanka actually is.
That is true. I remember when I was growing up, I was always told that Sri Lanka had Sinhalese people, Tamil people, and Muslim people. But what that statement fails to recognize is all the minorities that it doesn't account for. Like, we have Portuguese burgers, Dutch burgers, we have the Ahikuntaka people, and the list goes on. And that statement also fails to account for the first people or the indigenous people of Sri Lanka, the Vanyalattu. So, growing up with that sort of idea, when I started discovering about the multiculturalism of Sri Lanka, it definitely gave me something to be proud about. And that's exactly why we wanted to discuss about why we should care about the multiculturalism in Sri Lanka.
Oh, for sure. I think that pride is a very important thing. I think acknowledging the full diversity of Sri Lanka allows us to be proud of the Sri Lankan community by elevating that multiculturalism to a level of appreciation rather than something to be ashamed of. And like Randika said, we have one of the oldest surviving cultures in the world in our indigenous Vanyaletto community. They have a language that is ancient, a culture that has somehow preserved itself intact from prehistoric times to the modern day. And that's just the beginning of how diverse Sri Lanka is. We've got communities from all over the world: the Middle East, Persia, ancient India, and we've also got to consider the diversity from communities that settled in Sri Lanka over the course of its colonial history, such as the Malay community or even the Sri Lankan Malayali community.
That is true. And all of these communities and others that Jerome did mention, they have all contributed to the landscape of Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka is truly what it is now in terms of our cuisines, our traditions, our languages, and the way people think and behave. And all of that is a result of the mixture of all of these ethnic groups and how they have interacted over the years that has resulted in this. So identifying them and giving them credit for the contributions that they have made to the culinary and cultural landscape of Sri Lanka is very important, because that then gives us that common point, or that shared understanding and shared knowledge that is required for a country to get together and start appreciating each other.
And so, following on from that point, another reason why I think it's really important for us to have multiculturalism acknowledged in Sri Lanka is that Sri Lanka's food, cultures, and languages are really an amalgamation of all these cultures. A good example is the Sinhalese language. We have thousands of words from Portuguese. We have indigenous Sri Lankan words. We have words from Tamil, Malay, Dutch, English, and so on. And an appreciation of our multiculturalism will allow us to preserve and appreciate and gain a greater degree of satisfaction from participating in Sri Lankan culture and even in practicing language.
That is true. I'm somebody who really appreciates food. So when it comes to diversity explodes to the culinary landscape of Sri Lanka, that's massive. Like, we've got, like, if you take, for example, just a lamprey, for example, the idea and the concept is very Dutch. The sambal belacan is very Javan or Malay. And we've got the pickling systems that came from the Portuguese. And there's like lots of other components just in that help us to see that so many communities have actually contributed to Sri Lanka in a culinary sense as well.
Exactly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Once you start exploring Sri Lankan clothing, art, and music, you begin to realize that we're actually intricately connected to the rest of the world. Which brings me on to another point, which is that I feel appreciating multiculturalism in Sri Lanka reinforces our place in the global landscape, on the global landscape, as well as will help people hopefully appreciate how connected we are to diverse regions of the world. What do you think of that?
That is true, because when you travel around the world and you see the similarities between Sri Lanka and the country that you visit, it brings a certain self of satisfaction and appreciation as well, you know. Although certain things could have come from a time of colonization, we can't forget that the descendants of those people are truly Sri Lankan as well, because that is their motherland. So when you start, I remember a time when we went to Portugal and we found just the sardines exactly the way we eat them in Sri Lanka, just served on a plate in a little cafe in Portugal, and I was taken aback. And then I realized, vinegar and the use of vinegar in cuisine was something that the Portuguese brought to us. So it made perfect sense why the two dishes were actually exactly the same in both countries.
In fact, the Sinhalese word for vinegar, vinagre, is actually a Portuguese word, and the Portuguese word sounds exactly the same, vinagre. We call it vinagre. Another important reason why appreciating and embracing multiculturalism in Sri Lanka is important, within the current context of political instability, it's really important to remember that very often Sri Lankans are divided along political lines. I believe is that multiculturalism in Sri Lanka is relevance to the current context.